Tyler has 64, 65 in Longview.
On Bryan Houston's Sports Radio Live.
Why did you end this relationship?
There were many times where Manti and Lene have broken up.
Today on Bryan Houston's Sports Radio Live.
I just had to move on with my life and I had to start just living and let this go.
How will this impact Ray Lewis's legacy?
Because it just really shows you how people really plan things and try to attack people.
Donald Driver, 14 seasons in the NFL, announcing,
I'm going to officially put the cleats on the shelf. I'm going to walk away from the game.
Preparing for the big game, the Super Bowl, Sunday here in New Orleans.
Steve Nash making his return to the Valley of the Sun.
The company that says it gave deer antler spray to Ravens linebacker Ray Lewis says it also provided goods to members of the 2012 National Championship Alabama football team.
On 99.3 Talk FM, it's Bryan Houston's Sports Radio Live.
I watch a lot of movies. I know what I'm doing.
Here's Bryan Houston.
Welcome to the 4 o'clock hour. Thanks for joining us. We know you have a lot of options. We appreciate the fact that you landed on us and decided to stay there for a while. Super Bowl week. All that means for Cowboy fans is another week of misery where our team isn't there since, 97?
We find another team to root for.
Unbelievable.
Baltimore, Frisco, take your pick.
Yeah, you better enjoy it because I don't think our Cowboys are going to be there anytime in the near future, like in my lifetime.
Well, we always talk, though. There is hope, Brian. There is.
No, there's not. Who says that?
I try to look at the things half empty.
That's what that team is, half empty. Yeah, you're right. You hit it right on the nose. And to back me up on this, that noted journalist from Rattle and Hum Sports and also writes some stuff for the Tyler Morning Telegraph from time to time and has seen good football teams over the years. He covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they won the Super Bowl. So he knows what a good football team looks like. With us from Rattle and Hum Sports right now, Matthew Postins. How you doing, Matthew?
I'm fine. I'm just trying to deal with a world where something that hunters use to attract deer is now a performance-enhancing drug.
You know, I tried it once. I started wanting to eat raw corn a lot. That's pretty much what it did for me.
Interesting.
And I also found myself in the middle of the night on country roads throwing myself onto the windshields of big trucks.
But that's too many side effects for me, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see how you'd feel that way. So you're not impressed with deer antler spray as being the secret ingredient to Super Bowl champions?
No, I'm not, honestly. I find it almost laughable, in all honesty. But, this is, I guess, what passes for a Super Bowl controversy in an era where players get so much coaching on how to deal with the media. It's not like Joe Namath guaranteeing a victory or some of the things that happened in the 70s and 80s. I remember when I was at Super Bowl 40, the big controversy was a comment that Seahawks tight end Jeremy Stevens, it was a comment that Steelers linebacker Joey Porter made about how, we're going to win the game, yada, 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 and Jeremy Stevens fired back, and it was like the most innocuous controversy I've ever been a part of in my life. So
yeah, pretty slow week.
Yeah, it's a slow week, and that's what happens during Super Bowl week. I've covered 4 of them, and you get there on Sunday or Monday, and it's just you're not inventing stories, but there's a lot of space to cover. There are a lot of different stories. You have access to these guys most of the week, more access than you usually get during the week to your own team, and there's a thirst for information. There's a thirst for knowledge, thirst for features, and it's just fuel to the fire. I mean, especially when you have 5,000 journalists in the same place.
The one thing you get a lot of former Dallas Cowboys because those are the only ones who have any reason to be at a Super Bowl these days. Guys like Emmitt Smith, who was going up and down Media Row yesterday and Radio Row talking to different people about being frustrated with the Cowboys. And yet, this is what I love about this. John Machota from the Dallas Morning News wrote, Emmitt Smith admitted Wednesday that he's frustrated with the Dallas Cowboys, but he doesn't think Jerry Jones deserves the blame and adds that Jason Garrett is doing well as the team's head coach. Other than that, everything's great. I mean, really?
Well, Jerry signed his checks for a dozen years, so I could see his point of view.
Well, why is it these guys are so hesitant to rip on Jerry. I mean, they're in the Ring of Honor. He's not going to take them out. They're in the Hall of Fame now. He can't pull them out, and he's not going to keep them from being, hot commodities in Dallas. They're heroes in Dallas forever now. I mean, and when you see what's going on right now, and Emmett spent a lot of his time saying that, we weren't bothered by the owner coming down on the sidelines. Well, nobody's worrying about that. I could care less about Jerry Jones coming down on the sidelines. It's what he's doing to his coach right now that kills me.
Yeah, it's not a good situation for Jason Garrett, certainly. From the point of view of these former players, they approach it from the standpoint of a player. They understand that what happens on the field matters the most. And, to them, GMs and coaches are people to be relied on, people who coach them, people who manage them. But at the end of the day, they understand that what the players do on the field matters the most. And as anybody who has watched the Cowboys the last few years knows, it really hasn't mattered who's coached them or who the GM has been. The team simply hasn't played up to its potential.
But Troy Aikman would be the first to tell you that when things started to unravel in Dallas, it was because Barry Switzer came in and he loosened the reins and discipline went all to heck.
True that team had enough talent to overcome that. This Cowboys team right now doesn't have enough talent to overcome that sort of what you would call lax discipline. And I wouldn't even say Jason Garrett is lax in the vein of a Barry Switzer.
Oh, no.
But he certainly does not have the hammer that Jimmy Johnson had or Bill Parcells had when they were coaching here.
Okay, I know that you spend a lot of time writing about Senior Bowl players and guys who might be able to help the Cowboys. In particular, I'm real interested in Eric Fisher, the offensive lineman from Central Michigan, or Ansa from Brigham Young, because that guy looked like an absolute beast in the Senior Bowl, the defensive lineman.
Yeah, he had a huge game. I mean, I think half of his tackles were tackles for loss, and he had 1.5 sacks. And it's just, of all the players in that game, he was the one that stood out to everyone that week. He was a borderline first-round guy. I would say right now, as long as he does well during the rest of the offseason leading up to the draft, he'll probably be a first-round guy now.
Yeah, if he was available at 18, that would be the only guy I would say pass on an offensive lineman and take that guy.
He's intriguing. The one thing that he doesn't necessarily help you with right now is obviously he's an end. He's not a tackle. And one could argue that the Cowboys need to identify who that defensive tackle, that 3 technique of the future is going to be.
Good point.
If the cover 2 is going to be your defense going forward. But he's certainly a guy that you can put on the left side opposite DeMarcus Ware, and you can put together a pretty good pair of bookend defensive ends, the experienced Ware and the young guy Ansa on the left side. The question about Ansa, if you're going to do that, how good a run defender is he? If he's a good run defender, he's the type of guy you can put on that left side. But if he's lacking in the run defense department, then that you have to hold that into consideration because your left defensive end in that defense is your run stop.
Okay, never mind. Draft an offensive lineman.
And I'll tell you what, there was along with Fisher, there was a really good guard that game. It got a lot of play. Larry Warford out of Kentucky. Huge guy, about 330, 335 pounds. They ran behind him quite a bit in that game on Saturday. He got high marks from both of the guys that were calling that game, especially Mike Mayock of the NFL Network, who I think has a pretty good mind as far as scouting is concerned. He knows what NFL teams are looking for, and he can spot good players when he sees them. And that would be a guy, certainly, right now he's a second-round grade, so there's potential that the Cowboys could take him in the second round and spend their first-round pick on a defensive player, but a lot changes between now and the end of April.
The one player that I got to disagree with you on is E.J. Manuel. I mean, the guy was complete inconsistency his entire career in college. I just don't see him getting – I mean, I realize he's got all the measurables, but on the field, I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get from one game to the next.
You know who else was inconsistent coming out of college? Quincy Carter.
Yeah, I know, and you saw how that worked out too, huh?
Exactly. You would hope Jerry would learn from that, but I think what happens on Sunday could be very interesting. If the 49ers are to win that game and Colin Kaepernick is to have a great game, then you're going to have guys like Kaepernick, Cam Newton, Robert Griffin III, these so-called running quarterbacks who really aren't running quarterbacks. What they are dynamic two-way quarterbacks, guys who can run the football and beat you, guys who can pass the football effectively and beat you. And if Kaepernick shows that that works in the Super Bowl and that a team can win with that type of a quarterback, the NFL is a copycat league. All of a sudden, everybody starts looking at guys like that. And E.J. Manuel is a guy who, on the surface, possesses those skills, run and pass. And I can see Jerry Jones very easily getting intrigued with a guy like him in the second or third round because he feels like he has to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak.
But you pointed out, you used the words pass effectively. And that was the one thing, Quincy Carter, when his name comes up, this guy couldn't hit a bull's butt with a handful of popcorn from 2 feet away.
True. And Manuel is probably a better passer than Carter coming out of college.
And it wouldn't take much.
And it wouldn't take much, but he does have a ways to go. And I think that really boils down to what Garrett and the quarterback's coach, Wade Wilson, would think of as fundamentals. If they think that there's nothing systemically wrong with the way he throws the football and that they can work with that, that's something to consider. I mean, I don't think, E.J. Manuel doesn't have a hitch in his giddy up like Tim Tebow does with his arm. True. I mean, Tim Tebow fundamentally does not throw the football the way you want an NFL quarterback to throw it. E.J. Manuel probably has enough raw skills you could work with, but I'm certainly not advocating taking him in the second or third round. If you're going to take a guy like E.J. Manuel, take him in the fifth or sixth round when it's a good value to do so.
Right, I'm with you on that. It was funny, too, because I posted on my Facebook page today a question about that. If Kaepernick and the 49ers were to win the Super Bowl, would we see the floodgates open and everybody race to try to get dual-threat quarterbacks now? Would that completely change the game? I mean, right now you got 4, maybe 5, but would you just see a run on this, and would you see a complete overhaul of what the NFL offensive game looks like?
I don't know if it would be an overhaul, but like I said, this is a copycat league. Remember when Ronnie Brown had that huge game out of the Wildcat formation? I think he scored like 4 touchdowns and rushed for 200 yards against New England. Suddenly everybody wanted a Wildcat package. Well, 2 years later, barely anybody runs the Wildcat anymore. The thing about the NFL is when you bring in somebody who's different than what they're used to, like a Tebow, for instance. For the first several games Tebow was the starting quarterback in Denver, he was effective because nobody really understood how to defend him. But the thing about the NFL is the NFL figures you out. Whether you're an offensive guy or a defensive guy that offers something different, the NFL always finds a way to figure you out. And what happened by the end of that season, if you look at Tebow's numbers, defenses started figuring him out. And that's why he'll probably, unless he can figure out a way to adjust his game to be effective against the changes that defensive coordinators have made against him, he'll probably never be an effective starting quarterback in the NFL. And that's the big thing for guys like Robert Griffin, Cam Newton, even Colin Kaepernick going forward. Defensive coordinators will figure out a way to defend them. And once they do, it's about what they do to adjust their game to overcome the adjustments that defenses have made to play that.
All right, let's break down the Super Bowl a little bit. Who would you rather have, Kaepernick, or would you rather have Flacco?
I would rather have Flacco.
Why?
I would rather have Flacco because he has been in this fire. I mean, not necessarily in the Super Bowl, but he's been in the playoffs every single year. He's got a lot of accumulated experience in the postseason. Some of it's bad, some of it's good, but he can lean on all of that experience in a game like this and, overcome the kinds of things that can flummox young quarterbacks in games like this. Let's remember, Colin Kaepernick, this is his 9th or 10th start of his career. And while he has done some amazing things back there, you look at that Green Bay playoff game, he was incredible in that game. But, these kinds of games can expose a young player, even when they're mentally tough. And Kaepernick seems to be a mentally tough guy. They could expose you in some way. I'd rather have a guy who has a little bit more experience, who's been through a little bit more, who's been through some highs and been through some lows, and can manage that in a game like this. But I'd rather have Flacco based on his experience.
All right. How about Ray Rice or Gore?
That's a tough question. I think I'd rather have Rice because he's more durable. I know Gore's bigger, but Gore has been more prone to injury throughout his career. I'd rather have a guy who has a better track record of staying healthy, especially in a game like this. Rice seems to be a guy that can play through, minor to mid-major injuries more than Gore can. So I think I'd rather have Rice. And Rice certainly has the speed once he gets outside. He can make things happen. Gore's more of an in-between-the-tackles runner, which, with the offensive line the Niners have, that's a good guy to have. but I think I'd rather have a guy in a game like this that can make that explosive play on the outside once or twice during the game.
All right, receiving cores. Which receiving core would you rather have, the Ravens or the 49ers?
You know, I like San Francisco's overall receiving core a little bit more. I don't like them by much more, but when you consider that they have Crabtree, Crabtree and Kaepernick have really bonded over the past 10 games. Crabtree's numbers are as good as Des Bryant's numbers were at the end of the season. You've got Vernon Davis, who is a far better option at tight end than Dennis Pitta, although Pitta's nice, but, you know, Davis has the ability to stretch the field. You've got a crafty veteran in Randy Moss who's motivated because the only thing he doesn't have at this point is Super Bowl ring.
And he's the greatest receiver in the history of football.
And he's the greatest receiver in the history of football outside of Jerry Rice, Steve Largent, Chris Carter, Andre Reed, anybody else in the Hall of Fame.
I got about 20 names I can give you.
but I think overall the Niners receiving core is a little bit better than the Ravens.
Okay, and if you had to pick a defense, which defense would you rather have, Ravens or the Niners right now?
No, I think I'd rather have. God, it's tough. I'd rather have the Niners right now. I know Ray Rice is having a pretty incredible postseason run, but the Niners defense overall is one of the best units in the league from front to back. They really don't have much of a weakness anywhere. You know, the Falcons kind of exposed them a little bit down the field in the vertical passing game, and I think that's one way the Ravens might be able to expose them on Sunday. But I think overall I'd take the Niners. Their body of work over the course of the season, they've been more consistent. They've been better overall in keeping teams out of the end zone. They've been better at creating turnovers. I think I'd rather have the Niners in this game.
All right, and which Harbaugh would you rather have?
You know, I think I'd rather have John, to be honest with you. I know Jim gets a lot of attention for what he's done in San Francisco, and justifiably, he's taken a program that was really that had talent and was floundering, and really turned it into something in just 2 years. And you have to admire the job he did, not just with Kaepernick, but with Alex Smith as well. I wasn't a big advocate for the change he made at quarterback, but it worked. And head coaches get paid big money to make those kinds of choices. But I would take John because I think that he's just so steady. Jim seems to be a little bit more emotional. I think in a game like this, he might be the Harbaugh brother who's a little bit more prone to lose his cool than John is. So I think I'd rather have that steadier hand, especially toward the end of the game when you got to make those decisions that can help determine whether you win or lose the game. I'd take John Harbaugh over Jim.
Okay, so who are you picking in this thing? Because you've picked on both sides now all the way down the line here.
I am taking the Ravens. I think that this is... I think for a couple of reasons. Aside from just the fact that I think Flacco is going to have a very good game, I think their offensive line is a little bit better. I think overall they'll find the matchups they need to get the ball down the field and score some points. But there's also the team of destiny factor, not just the fact of Ray Lewis. And while I don't necessarily want to give Ray Lewis a platform to be a drama queen one more time, if they win, that obviously becomes the case. But also you have to think about the Art Modell factor. The guy who owned this team for 30-something years, was their owner when they won the Super Bowl a dozen years ago, died earlier this year, just before the season started. There's this certain team of destiny momentum that seems to be surrounding this team throughout the year, even when they were struggling defensively. We saw them struggle against the Cowboys defensively. If for no other reason, it's just this. There's momentum, and I think there's more momentum with them right now than there is with the 49ers. I think we kind of expected the 49ers to be here. I'm not sure we expected the Ravens to be here, and they seem to have rallied around this is Ray's final ride. We're honoring Art Modell, and they're a darn good football team too. I think they'll find a way to scheme the Niners out of the game, and I think one thing you watch for is in this game is the offense has really responded for the Ravens ever since Jim Caldwell was installed as offensive coordinator. I think they're really going to try and stretch the field early and often in this game and try and put the 49ers secondary in a corner.
Finally, wouldn't you love to see when the teams take the field on Sunday afternoon, wouldn't you love to see all of the Ravens wearing big deer antlers when they come running out?
Actually, I'd rather see the 49ers come out running big deer antlers running out. That'd be a nice slap in the face. Given everything that's happened this week.
Good stuff. Hey, Matthew, thanks very much for coming on, buddy.
No problem, man.
All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Okay.
Matthew Postins from Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM. Coming up, we'll be talking to Craig Smoke on Radio Row from New Orleans and the Super Bowl.